Okay, so this is a tutorial on how to rip models from Pikmin 4 and open them in basically any other 3D application you might want to use, but specifically we'll be focusing on Blender later in the tutorial. But in order to do that, first we're going to have to access the files, and in order to do that, we're going to need a copy of Pikmin 4. Or there is a dump of all the files, all the model files, in a research document. And if you want to do that, you can. That's probably the safest way to do it if you don't want to dump the ROM file yourself or acquire it in any other way. If you're fine with that, you can go ahead and do that, but just know that you have to download all of them at the same time, and the download itself is 8.4 gigabytes. You can definitely do that. It's probably the safest way to do that. I'll have a link to the document in the description, and you can find the model files at the bottom. And there's a download link. You can download them all at the same time, and you can have access to all of them, but again, it is 8.4 gigabytes. Now, getting the ROM is also going to be pretty large because it's the entire game, but with this you can access all of the files on your own and pick and choose which models you want to, look at, access, export, rip, and all that. So if you have a copy of the ROM, like if you dumped it from your Switch or whatever, the easiest way to access the files is to extract the data from them using a Switch emulator. So here I have Ryujinx. It's just one of the two most commonly used Switch emulators, and it can do what we need it to do pretty easily. This also can work with Yuzu, although I haven't tested it with that. When I initially dumped the files, I used Ryujinx, and they've worked perfectly fine. So for this, I would recommend Ryujinx. I think it can work with Yuzu, but that's just if you want to use it. I would, again, recommend Ryujinx, and I'll have a link in the description to download that. I'm not going to tell you how to set it up. There is a whole process. There's tutorials for that and all that to get the game in there and make sure Ryujinx can actually read it and then get you to the point where you can extract the files. But I'm not going to go over that. I can't go over that right now. We're just going to be extracting the data from it. So right click on Pikmin 4, go down to extract data. EXEFS is what we want. So go ahead and click on that, and you'll probably have the file manager open up, and you can pick where you want it to go. Just make sure you know where it's going, and then extract it. And then it should, start doing that. There should be like a loading bar come up on the screen. It might take a little bit, but once it's done, all the files will be extracted and you can access them. So let's go ahead and look at that. So here's what extracting the EXEFS should have done. It gives you these few files that aren't really important, but what is important is the caret4. That's the internal name for Pikmin 4. So go in there, go into content and packs, and then you see this. And if you've checked out other Switch games, you might not be familiar with this. Usually dumping them or extracting the data will just give you access to all the files in there, and then you'll have to check them individually in whatever way possible. But for here, we're kind of hitting a roadblock and seeing file formats that we don't usually see, and most Switch games don't do this. The reason this is the way it is because Pikmin 4 was made in Unreal Engine, and so the files are all packed into a certain way, and it's just the usual way that Unreal Engine does it, in a .pack, a .ucas, and a .utoc. The global files we won't really need, we won't be using them. What is important is the .pack and the .utoc. These are, actually all three of them, are where all of the files are held, but we can't really access them right now. Like, we can't open them or anything. It wouldn't give us access to anything. They're kind of just packed all together in an Unreal Engine only readable format. But there are tools out there that help us to check this without the use of Unreal. Even if we tried to import it into Unreal, it wouldn't work because the project file would need to be built exactly as it was when the developers are making it. But we do have a tool that we can use for this called FModel. This is a software made for checking and data mining Unreal Engine games. So we're going to go ahead and get that. Make sure to download it. Say thank you, open up your file manager, go ahead and download it, and then you will need to unzip it. And when you open it up, you may not see these things. That's because I've already used FModel before. But what you're going to want to do is go down here, type in the name of the game, just call it caret4, And the directory is wherever you dumped the exefs of caret 4. Go into content, packs, and select the folder, and then you should be good from there. And once you've got the detected game here, you're going to want to change the UE version to 4.28 because that's the only one that's compatible with Pikmin 4, because that's the or close to the version of Unreal it was made in. And so you'll click OK, and it should work, but I've already done that, so I will go ahead and open up my version of FModel that I've already set up. And then you should see the .pack and the .utoc for caret 4. And now you can just go ahead and double click the utoc, and then now you see engine, Unreal Engine. This is just general stuff that Unreal Engine comes with. We can't really do anything with this. This doesn't really have what we want. What we do want is in the caret 4 folder, because when we open these, we can see there's a lot more stuff now. And if you're used to other Nintendo Switch games, you know, dealing with those, file structures kind of look similar to this. And so this is what you would usually see in a dump of a game if it's not like encrypted or packed in any certain way. But since it was made in Unreal, we had to use this software to get to this point. So now, basically, we can check any file, any image or model contained in this. You can also check the audio files and stuff like that. FModel is pretty good at letting you view things and listen to sound files and all that. And you can even preview what you want to, you know, extract before you have to actually extract it. So since we're going to be looking at models and extracting them, the basic places you want to look is in characters for all the like captains and crew members and stuff in the Pikmin, or the enemies. And for the objects, there's some other things in here, like the onion I think is in here. There's treasures and stuff like that. You can view these, like we can see. It'll open up a little model viewer. You can see this is one of the billiard balls, one of the treasures. And it'll actually let you view models in FModel. So it's quite handy if you want to just take a look at these things, especially if you're trying to find a specific thing that might be hard to look for. You want to make sure you find the right thing before you extract it. You can absolutely do that. You can go through them, extract the folders packages, and it will do that in FModel, and then you can view them in the application itself. So what we're going to be doing is taking a look at the enemies, because they're pretty easy to rip. So they're found in the characters folder, and you go to Techie. This is basically all of the enemies are listed under here, all of their models. So let's go ahead and finally select one to extract. I'll just go ahead and extract the bull bear model, because we can go over some interesting things when we import it into Blender and check out how the materials work. So in order to properly extract it, we're going to right click it when it's selected, and we're going to save folders package models, and that has a .psk beside it. PSK is the model format, the file format for all the models in the game, and we're going to go over how to properly import that into Blender later, but first we're going to extract the PSK, and if you want to, extract the PSA, which is the animation files, and you can do that, and we'll go ahead and extract it. Alright, and then as you can see, it did some things on the right, and it says completed at the bottom. It didn't open up the file manager because it actually extracts to its own folder. Depending on where you unzipped FModel, wherever the exe is held, it will then create an exports folder. Go to output, exports, the game, caret 4, content, caret 4, characters, techie, and yeah. It may not be in here, as we saw in the exports folder. There's also a game folder. Depending on which models you do, and I'm not sure, I can't confirm if this is random or not. It might export to the caret 4 folder, it might export to the game folder. You'll just have to check both. just go through the files as they were in FModel until you get to what you exported, and we exported the Kuma Chappie, which is the bull bear. And in here we can see all of the files are here proper, and so we successfully exported it. But of course all of the model files are in PSK format, so how do we import that into a 3D software like Blender? Well, in order to do that, we're going to have to get a little plugin or add-on for Blender, which allows us to just export or import PSK and PSA models. I'll have a link to this in the description so you can get the exact one, but we're going to have to download the release, go to releases, get the .py file, the IO import scene unreal PSA psk.py. And once you've done that, we'll go ahead and move on to the part where we work in Blender. So if you know how to import add-ons, this will be pretty easy. If you don't, just go ahead and go to Edit, Preferences, and you'll have to install, and then you'll have to look for wherever you installed or wherever you downloaded the add-on for PSK and PSA. And once you've done that, it should be good. You should be able to check mark it to make sure it's turned on. And then if it works successfully, you can go up here to File, Import, and there should be, usually at the bottom, the new add-on import options, which is PSK and PSA. And so with this, we can easily import whatever models we extracted from the Caret4 folder in FModel. And we can also, of course, import animations over top of the armature that we import with those models. So let's go ahead and import what we extracted. Of course, you'll have to go back through and find the output, the exports folder, go through all that. What I usually do is I just put it in a big ripped models folder and move it from the FModel folder to an easier to access place. But you can keep them all in the FModel export folder. It's perfectly fine. But go to Kuma Chappie, and then we have a few model files, PSK format files that we could import. Usually, especially with enemies, what you want to import is just the one that says its name with LOD at the end. The models like Shadow and Silhouette are for in-game things. Like the Silhouette is if you see enemies through the walls, like in the night expeditions and stuff. That's what that is. The Shadow is the shadow that appears under the models. But what we want is the one that just has the name, no shadow or silhouette in it. So we'll go ahead and import. And now we can see we have the model imported. It's rather small, but I usually like to size it up an even amount anytime I import a Pikmin 4 model. So I just hit S and 4, size it up 4 times the size it imported at. And I just want to say before we continue further that this will require you to have a little bit of knowledge of Blender, just a bit. I'll walk you through most of the process, but things like navigating the viewport and finding certain things over here, hopefully you already know. If not, there's plenty of tutorials out there to look at. But for now, we're just going to go to this viewport, and we can see that the model is completely white because it doesn't have its textures applied yet. It does have all the materials, and they're all named what they would usually be in the files, but there's no materials. So what we're going to have to do is go to the shader editor, and we're going to have to click Use Nodes. You could also click it over here, whichever is easier. And so now we have an actual setup, principled BSDF, to apply textures to and stuff. And so here is another thing that we're going to have to deal with when we try to get an image texture, plug it in here, and then find where the files were dumped. As you can kind of see already, it kind of looks like there's a little bit of transparency because when I highlight it, it becomes blue at certain parts. And that's exactly the case. So we have the color going in. This is actually, okay, we also need to talk about this. So this, called Techie Glass, is just a general glass shader in Unreal. So for use in Blender, we're just going to want to make it a glass shader, so it can be about what it is in Unreal. You can change this however you want to look how it might look in the game, but the easiest thing to do is to move the roughness way down, change this to a lower setting so it doesn't warp too much. But of course we can't really see the effects it's taking right now because everything else is white and it's also inside the eye right now. So let's go to another material, again repeat the process, turn on use nodes. Let's get an image texture in right here. Open up the image, plug it there, and this is the material for the eyes specifically. And as you can see, it looks pretty weird. It's super dark, not like it should be. Let's go ahead and do that again for this material, which should be the rest of the body. Go ahead and plug that into here. And yeah, something's definitely wrong. So I'm not exactly sure why the files are like this, but if you take a look at the images on their own, there's some transparency to it. Like most of the base color textures will have transparency at certain points, and they're not perfectly flat base color textures. I'm not exactly sure why this is done. Maybe it's done for some reason in Unreal. Maybe it's exported this way. I'm not really sure, but we're going to have to fix it in order to use it. So there's two ways to go about this. One very simple way that can be done all in Blender. Another way that will require a photo editing software of your choice. I'm going to go over Photoshop, but you can of course also use GIMP if it has similar ways. But first we're going to check and see how we can do a quick fix in Blender. And basically all you need to do is go to the image texture with the base texture in it, whatever has transparency, and go from alpha straight to channel packed. And now we can see that changed some things and it looks basically normal. Looks a lot better than it did before, and all the transparency should be gone. But this is of course only in Blender. Of course the texture itself, if we go back to the files, is unchanged. It doesn't change it and make it normal as it should be here. So if we do want that, if we wanted to like edit it further, we would need the actual base color texture as it was before. And so we can easily do that in something like Photoshop. Of course, GIMP might also be usable. So we can edit it in Photoshop pretty easily. We can definitely see how the transparency is basically completely ruining the texture. We can't really tell what this is super well because of all the transparency. And the fix for this is kind of strange, but relatively simple once you get used to it. What we'll need to do is go over to Layer at the top, and then we want to go to Layer Mask from Transparency. And then you'll see it made a mask over here. We don't actually need this anymore, so we can go ahead and delete it. And look at that. The base color texture as it should look without any of the additional transparency that we didn't need. So I'm not exactly sure why this method works. I'm not exactly sure why the texture was like that in the first place, but if you want to have the texture as it should be, and the base texture color, or for any of the MRA textures, if they have transparency like this too, just go to Layer, Layer Mask, from Transparency, it'll make a mask, delete that mask, and then it should be good. So of course you can go up to File and export to PNG as you want, save it where you want, overwrite the original, or make a new copy, whatever you want. But that's the slightly more complicated way to get the texture as it should be. And of course you can have the texture on its own outside of Blender that way. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to that. There we go. And then we're going to need to set up a couple more textures for the other two that were extracted. Going to need to add a normal map node. Plug the color of this image texture down here into that. Plug that into here, and we'll fix this up later. We just need to get the node set up ready. And then we're going to add a separate color node for the packed MRA texture. Plug that color into there. And then we'll get these ready. So this is the MRA. It'll usually look purplish, reddish, something like that. And it should have an M at the end of it. The D is the base color, M is the MRA, and the N is the normal map. So get the MRA in there, and then what should be correct is red for roughness, and then blue for specular. Most of the maps, MRA maps used in the game that I've seen don't usually use the green map, so I'm not exactly sure what it's for. But I have seen it used, I'm pretty sure, on a couple things. It might be for ambient occlusion. If that's the case, we don't really need to worry about using it here. But we also need to select the normal map, and once that's in there, we will change the color space from sRGB to raw, and that should give us the normal map as it should be. So this is the basic material node setup that you'll need for most Pikmin 4 models. All of them should work in this way usually. So now we can just get it ready to render out, make it look a little bit better. I'll just change some settings as I usually do whenever I make a new Blender file. And again, this is all stuff you'll need to have already known before coming to the tutorial. If not, just follow along as best you can. Watch me do what I'm doing here. But my one recommendation is to change the look. After you change it to standard, change the look from none to high contrast, because I found that Pikmin 4 kind of has a higher contrast in general overall in the game. If you want it to look similar to that, you can enable that. You don't have to. Sometimes the lighting itself can make that work. But you're definitely going to want to change it to standard here at the bottom in color management. So now let's get a light in here, just to make sure everything looks nice. A little spooky, but that's just how they are. And of course we can add an HDRI to make it look even a little bit better. I'll just select a random one here. There we go. And he is pretty shiny on the back, but you can see it is at least different in some areas. It's slightly less shiny here. It gets less shiny on the legs as it goes down and things like that. You can change this if you want. I've found that it's not super accurate to the game. It's only somewhat accurate, but usually it's way more shiny than it needs to be, so you can get an invert color node and plug it into the red, and of course that makes it the opposite of what it just was, and so it's completely matte, basically really rough. And you can change this as you want, make it a bit shiny but not too much. Of course it's all free reign, however you want to change it beyond this point, because once it's in the 3D software you can change it however you want to make it look any way you want. But up here we can see that its eyes are kind of strange, and that's because a part of it is actually for the eyes during the night missions, and that's what these are right here. So I'm going to go ahead and select them with L individually, and then separate them so that they're not part of the same model. I'm just going to move them to an extra folder just in case, and not delete them, just in case I ever want to use that. But that is for the night missions where their eyes start glowing. You'll only usually see that extra little modeled bits for the glowing eyes on enemies that appear in the night modes. If an enemy you have extracted that doesn't appear in the night modes doesn't have it, that's why. So here we have the really glassy looking eyes. We're going to have to change something in Eevee unless you're rendering in cycles. If you already have, then as you can see it's not going to be a problem because glass just works in cycles. But we'll go ahead and fix it in Eevee. So make sure screen space reflections is on, turn on refraction, and then down in the material make sure that blend mode is to alpha blend and shadow mode is to none. Show backface is turned off, and then make sure screen space refraction is turned on here. and now you can actually see through the glass. But yeah, that should basically do it for the importing the Blender process. If you want to add animations, of course, you can import them after you've selected the armature. Go to your export, go to the animations, and then pick whichever one you want. You can view basically any of these. Some of them will just be for when the Pikmin are carrying them after they have died, but most of them should be animations that play out when they do certain things like attacks, walking around and stuff like that in the game. And if you want to, you know, see that on the timeline, you can open up a timeline. Here's all the keyframes for it. And we can just change the amount so we can see it loop. And yeah, so hopefully this was helpful. Of course, this is just for Blender. I showed how to import the model into Blender because of the add-on that allows you to import the PSK and PSA. But if you have another software of choice that you prefer over Blender, then you can of course export the armature and model in other formats after this. So if the software doesn't import PSK or PSA and it doesn't have an add-on, you can go through the workflow of putting it through Blender and then exporting it out of Blender to whatever format you want it in for other software. But yeah, that should be basically it. If you have any questions about this or any concerns or anything like that, if there's anything I missed or there's a process you don't understand, please just comment below. If there's any software I forgot to put in the description or anything like that. But yeah, hopefully this helped. I know some people were asking how this was even possible, how it was to extract models from the game and various things, and hopefully now that you know about FModel and the whole process, hopefully it'll be a lot easier for you. So I hope this helped, and have a good day.